Hi, I'm Jarrad Brown, Australian expat financial planner based here in Singapore. Welcome to my video series. Today, what I'd like to share with you are the repatriation tips for moving back to Australia. Now, a lot of this is going to be relevant for those Australian expats in Singapore, but you'll also find that this does apply to Australians just about everywhere. We're going to walk through most of the tips, most of the things that you should be thinking about, from finances to notifying your banks to clearing tax, to all of those other little steps that you need to be prepared for when it comes to moving back to Australia. COVID-19 has certainly meant that a lot more Aussie expats have been thinking about going home earlier than expected. Many have brought their plans forward to return to Australia, and many who might have been thinking, look, I'm only going to be abroad for 2 years, utilise the benefit of being in Singapore for all of the wonderful travel opportunities that it affords, have kind of figured, well, given that's not going to happen, let's just bring forward our plans to return home. And naturally, there are those people sitting in Australia at the moment waiting for the chance to move abroad. So while it might be a little bit early, certainly very helpful for you to be aware of what you need to think about to move back. So let's dive right in. First one, we'll tackle the finances. So the first thing to look at when it comes to your personal finances in preparing for a move home is to look at all of the money, all of the savings, the existing investment accounts or pensions, retirement accounts that you have in Singapore or the current country of your residence. So here you want to think about whether you should move money home. You want to think about how you clear your tax debt, particularly in Singapore, a very important one, before you leave the country. Think about the receipt of any bonuses, of any other commissions or other revenue you're going to receive as part of your employment. Think about how your shares, how your investment accounts are structured in terms of ownership. Should you change that before you go back? Should you realise capital gains? Should you sell assets? Transition anything before you return? Again, you'll certainly want to be thinking about that one. Again, make sure that your tax obligations are all fully cleared, and make sure that any revenue that you receive as part of your employment, that you're aware of how that's going to be treated for tax. In many cases, if you're in Australia and you reside in Australia, when a bonus might have been paid from a Singapore employer, you may face tax obligations on that money in Australia, even though it may be earned while you're in Singapore. So very important to be aware of these. Now, when it comes to the Australian side, you'll want to think about a variety of things here as well. If you've got investment properties, think about, are they negatively geared? Are they positively geared? How are you going to really create the tax strategy behind that? Think about your superannuation. Are you going to be contributing to super? Are you going to be utilising unused concessional contribution caps that you haven't been using while you're in Singapore? Again, make sure that you're thinking about that one. If you've got a mortgage on your own home, are you going to have an offset? Do you need to refinance from an investment loan to an owner-occupied loan? Make sure that the address is updated with your bank, with the share registries, any other financial organisations that you're associated with in Australia. All of these things need to be updated. Now, I know it sounds like a lot. We will be including a bit of a link to our cheat sheet, our checklist, so you can download that. And that obviously includes everything that we're running through in this video. So don't feel too overwhelmed, but at the same time, these are things that can't be ignored. So lots to consider when it comes to the personal finances. Let's move on to the next area. Now, the second item that you'll want to address with a move back to Australia is updating all of the providers that you deal with. Now here, we all deal with all sorts of organisations on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, so I would certainly suggest creating a bit of a checklist in Excel or on paper, whatever you prefer, and just start checking them off one by one. Because you're going to need to update the tax registry, the Australian Tax Office, the Electoral Commission, the banks, the share registries, any financial organisations that you deal with, any memberships that you have, Australia Post, all of the utility organisations that you deal with. Everyone is going to need to be updated. Your car registration, your licence registration, all of these things, you need to update your address. There isn't quite a central organisation just yet. Perhaps an idea for a business venture, if no one's already thought of that, to update all of these organisations at once. It's time consuming, it's a bit of a hassle, but it has to be done, and it should be done quite quickly. In some cases, it can mean some tax benefits for you because you're no longer treated as a non-resident for tax purposes. So it can have some influence on how withholding tax is applied, on any dividends that you receive, or any interest that you're earning with your bank. So make sure all of these things are updated, make sure you're not forgetting organisations, but certainly make sure that the most important ones are tackled first. Now, the next aspect that you want to deal with and make sure you're ready for is just simply having copies of all of your important documents. So these are things like your wills, your power of attorney, advanced medical directives, passports, visas. If your partner isn't an Australian citizen, make sure you've got copies of any permanent residency documents, any visas. You're going to need that for immigration for any sort of visa application as well. So make sure that you've got these things on file. Tax returns, company documents, whatever else is important, whatever else you need to retain copies of, make sure that you've got them. And when it comes to exiting Singapore, entering Australia, any other documentation that you need, such as tax clearance, for example, again, make sure that you've got hard copies, make sure that they're in a safe place, and a safe place that you know exactly where it's located. So just a simple one to prepare for, but certainly an important one not to be forgotten. Now, the next item that you want to address is all of your banking needs. So if you don't already have an Aussie bank account, you're probably going to want to open one. There's plenty of comparison websites out there. There's Finder, there's CanStar, there's a variety of others. You can find which one's going to be the best for you and give you exactly what you're after. If you're applying for credit cards, you're applying for home loans, naturally make sure that you've got the documentation in place. Reach out to a mortgage broker if you don't already have one, and they'll be able to scour the market for you and find what's going to be the most suitable, as well as making sure that you're aware of what documentation is going to need to be in place. If you need to be employed for a certain period of time in Australia, that way none of this is going to come as a surprise. If you have any tax debts in Singapore or your country of residence, make sure they're cleared. Make sure any other bills are cleared. In some cases, they may ask for a tax report on your tax file number, basically on your tax clearance, just to make sure that there are no outstanding debts. So just make sure these items are cleared. That way it's not going to impact your credit rating. And the next items that you're going to want to cover are your home, job and school search. Now for some, this will already be sorted out in the preparation for the move back home, but for others that's not necessarily the case. So when it comes to the house, you're going to want to consider, particularly if you don't already have a home, where you're going to live, what suburb, are you going to buy it, rent it, are you going to go through the process of rent vesting because that makes more financial sense for you. You can check out our other video on rent vesting and when you might want to consider it. Certainly not for everyone, but can be a valuable wealth creation tool. So check that out. You're also going to want to consider school catchment areas, what sort of suburb you want to live in, how much you should put down as your deposit, all of those wonderful things about moving back into Australia. When it comes to the school search, naturally, if your children are already in international or local school in Singapore, you may want to find those schools that offer similar or maybe even different extracurricular or core subjects that they're studying in Singapore. What we find with a lot of Australian expat families moving back to Australia is that their children can sometimes be months or years or grades ahead from studying in Singapore. So you may want to find other ways in Australia if the school doesn't offer it through extracurricular offering. That might be tutoring, it might be other subjects, other courses they can do, different clubs and societies they can get involved with, but just make sure that they can enter Australia smoothly and get back into the schooling system. Now when it comes to your job search, if you're still looking for a job, naturally start connecting on LinkedIn, start reaching out as early as possible, reach out to old networks. For those that are looking for jobs, you might want to consider reaching out to recruiters, start getting back into those industries associations that you might have lost contact with over time. If you already have your job, then naturally you're going to want to think about tax obligations, income filing, if you've got property, any negative gearing, any salary sacrifice, super contributions, car leasing, all of those wonderful things that start to become a lot more important. when you're paying tax up to 50%. So lots to consider when it comes to the job search. Now, when it comes to actually making the move, getting on the plane and actually flying down to Australia, there's a few things that you're going to want to make sure you're ready for. Now, a lot of this you'll already be aware of, but I do just want to make sure that we are ticking the boxes, covering all of our bases in planning to return home. Now, naturally first, we're going to want to make sure that you've got your airline tickets, you've got your hotel accommodation if you're staying in hotels, if you're staying in temporary accommodation, you've got all of the paperwork associated in hard copies and of course in a safe place. Now, if you are repatriating during COVID-19 times, naturally there's going to be some additional requirements, PCR test records, Australian travel declarations, G2G pass if you're flying into certain states and territories in Australia. All of this documentation is going to need to be in place. So if you are flying during COVID times, again, just check out the state websites as well as the Australian Border Force website as well, and just make sure that you're ticking the boxes, you are covering all of the requirements, particularly during COVID times, because a lot of these things can change. Now, if you're repatriating with pets, there is often quarantine time required, particularly when it comes to Australia. So just make sure that the documentation is prepared, your pets are prepared, emotionally. There is going to be some quarantine time involved, but just make sure that you're planning for these things early, because a lot of the time it can be weeks and months involved for your pets to stay in quarantine. Now, naturally, anything of value, any of your important goods, valuables, make sure that they're in your hand luggage, traveling with you safely, and just make sure that the journey back is as seamless as possible. So I hope you find these tips really helpful in preparing for your move back. If you have any questions or even anything you'd like to add, please do drop me a note in the comments. If you want to discuss your own situation and preparation for the move home, please do feel free to reach out to me. My contact details are in the notes here. If you found this helpful, please do remember to subscribe, hit like on the video. I certainly appreciate you tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you next time.